Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon and welcome to Orange Cyberdefense's COVID-19 webinar. I'm Etienne Grief, the Group CTO. On the webinar, I'm also joined by my boss, Laurent Silier. He's the Executive Vice President for Technology and Marketing, and of course, Charl van der Walt, our Head of Security Research. Now, I know there's been a lot of discussion around COVID-19 and the impact on cybersecurity, but I hope and believe that Orange, OBS, and OCD can add to previous perspectives and perhaps bring some new and interesting perspectives to this topic. Now, at OCD, we believe in research-driven insights. And further to this presentation is based on research and insights from a number of areas of the business. You know, the Security Research Center, our Computer Emergency Response Team, the Epidemiology Lab, the OSINT unit, our cyber SOCs across Europe, our advisory and architecture teams, our global CISO office, and lastly, our global CTO office. So for me, this presentation brings all those different insights and knowledge together from those different parts of our business. The thing to remind everybody is that we will be having a Q&A session at the end of this presentation. And so please do ask your questions in the question panel, and we'll endeavor to answer them to the end. So without any further ado, it gives me great pleasure to introduce the Head of Security Research, Charl van der Walt, to share some of his insights on COVID-19 in the cyber world. So Charl, take it away.
Etienne, thank you very much. Hello, everyone. I greet you from total lockdown in Cape Town, South Africa, where I have the distinct pleasure of being locked down in my apartment next to the beach. I hope you all are well and coping with this extraordinary time that we're living in. As Etienne said, my name is Charl van der Walt. I head up our Security Research Center. If you're on Twitter, please take a moment to follow me. My details are there. We're trying very hard to be a source of kind of rational and thoughtful insight during this time. So I promise I won't waste your digital minutes. Also take a moment, please, to visit our website. We'll be sharing out some additional resources at the end of this presentation where you can read more on this subject. As Etienne said, as the Security Research Center of Orange Cyberdefense, we've taken a little longer to come out with a position paper on COVID-19. And the reason for that is because we really felt that we wanted to do it justice and not become a part of the hype cycle, you know, fear, uncertainty, and doubt around the current crisis. We believe firmly it's primarily a humanitarian crisis, and we want to look at the cyber elements of it with a reasoned and rational filter on. And so we've taken a bit longer than some. We've consulted deeply within the organization. We've co-opted a lot of people, a lot of teams, a lot of capabilities to get views and opinion. And it's the result of all of those perspectives that we'll be sharing with you today. Also, just to point out, today's presentation is really a cut through the paper that we released last week. I'll be sharing that link again, but if you look on any of our social media and on our website, you'll be able to find it very easily. So in places where I'll be skirting through some of the content, there's also areas that I won't be covering content that's in the paper. Please take a moment to have a look there. It really is our best effort to provide thoughtful guidance during this time. So at a high level, this is kind of the journey that I want to be taking you through today. I want to talk a little bit about what it means to be in IT in a pandemic. It is, you know, we've used the word unprecedented many times in this pandemic, but I think that the IT experience is in many ways truly unprecedented. So I want to touch on that. I want to touch on some of what we've been seeing in terms of cyber threat activity, cyber crime during this time. It's a topic that gets covered extensively elsewhere and is changing minute by minute. So although we will spend some time on that, that's not really the key. We want to look at what we've seen over the last few weeks, really as a way of guiding our thinking about how we should be responding. which sort of brings us to the core message of this presentation, which is, how do we think about our threat models at this time, particularly what has changed and what hasn't changed. And then finally, I'll be providing a sort of a flyover of what our guidance is to IT and security managers at this time. I have no doubt that you've all been thinking about this very hard. You understand your environments better than we do. And much of this is probably going to be no news to you. But our hope is that some of our thinking will also resonate with you and be useful to you at this time. So what does it mean to be in a pandemic? Well, I don't think I'm the right person to talk to you about the virology and the epidemiology of the current crisis. What I want to highlight is sort of the second part of the definition of the word pandemic, which is this notion that we're dealing with something that is occurring at a really unusual scale and scope. Something that's affecting an exceptionally high portion of the population and occurring over a wide geographic area. And of course, because we're talking about IT, the factor that immediately springs to mind for us is the impact, not so much of the health impact of the pandemic, but the impact of the pandemic on people's lives and their working lives in particular. According to a recent report by Statista, approximately a third of the world's population is currently under lockdown. That means millions of people suddenly being forced to make a living from home and do their work from home. And if anything, from an IT point of view, that is the defining factor. That is the thing that is the most significant when we think about our threat models. And that's forced us as IT practitioners to deal with what I think we can reasonably refer to as an IT crisis. Without too much exaggeration. And that crisis is really shaped by these 6 key elements that we identify in our paper. The first is the speed with which we've had to adapt. We've had to change the way we think about our IT systems extremely quickly. In some cases, countries were given only hours of notice about a lockdown. In other cases, it's been days, but it's really been a phenomenally rapid time of change for us. Workers themselves have been forced to adapt to working remotely from their homes, using home equipment, and collaborating virtually, using whatever, Zoom probably, as we all well know. IT practitioners have then had to think in this context of change about how we protect those users. And bad guys, the cybercrime and offensive cyber landscape has in turn responded very quickly to increase the threat level, as we will show in this paper. And we've had to think about how we respond to that. And all of this we've probably had to do with less, in the sense that we ourselves are also all working from home. Instead of my 4 monitors at my desk, I now have 1 laptop and a phone. You might be in the same position. But not only that, we're also impacted as people by the virus. Our motivation, our concentration, focus, our own health, or the health of the people that we love, is really constraining our ability to respond. And so that's created a situation which I think is wholly unprecedented for us as IT and security workers. So let's start by doing a quick review of the sorts of criminal and hacking activity that we've been observing. As I said previously, I think there are other news organizations that are quicker at recounting these kinds of anecdotes, and I'm also not sure that it's useful to hyper-analyze every single security incident that occurs during this time. But we do want to provide you a sort of a cross-section of examples that we think are instructive in terms of how our threat models have changed. And we can summarize those by really observing and recognizing these key factors. The first is that our home users are more susceptible to social engineering kinds of attacks. They're in a heightened level of anxiety, they feel threatened, they have a hunger for information, they're desperate for news, good or bad. They're dealing with technology platforms like Zoom that they may not have had to deal with before. And so they themselves are more vulnerable than they even would have fundamentally been, already were before this crisis. The attackers themselves, as I said, have pivoted as they've demonstrated frequently in the past, but they've pivoted very rapidly to exploit this new state of vulnerability, but just exploit the, the really delicious lure that COVID as a topic presents to them. Home IT, which has become the new normal for us, our home routers, our home PCs, our personal mobile phones have become the platforms from which we operate. And those are, I think it's fair to say, by and large, less secure than the corporate environments that we've been used to protecting over these last few years. Of course, in that, we've come to depend on remote access systems, VPNs, application portals, web UIs, etc. And these have increasingly become a target over this time. The targeting of these kinds of technologies was accelerating before the crisis, but that's just continued. And of course, now the volume of them has increased and our dependence on them has increased also. And then finally, it's sad to say, but health systems and health data have also become targets increasingly during this time, although again, they were already targets before, but we are seeing a very deliberate concentration by various kinds of attackers on both health technologies and health systems data. So let's dive into examples sort of across these areas, which will illustrate these points. First, as we've said, is the coronavirus and COVID-19 presents bad guys with a perfect lure. This is an example that our epidemiology lab picked up on, of using donations to the World Health Organization as a part of a phishing lure, and we could give you hundreds of these, and I'm sure you've seen many more. But it's clearly there was never a better time for hackers and scammers to use something as a pretext, and they're doing that very dramatically. From our CERT teams, we're observing this very closely, and we have been since early on in the crisis. Just to give you an example, during this week, this is when we were writing the paper, between the 20th and the 26th of March, we observed 8,000 new DNS domains being registered with COVID-related names. Now, of course, it would be impossible for us to determine whether those 8,000 are malicious or suspicious or could become malicious, but it just speaks to the volume of activity in that space. A more concrete indicator, also from our CERT team, is the number of fraudulent or malicious emails being reported by our customers. So during this week, again, we analyzed about